Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This is the Dark Light Emissary, and before we get to today's topic, I just wanted to remind you that after this video goes live, later today will be a live stream around 6 p.m. Arizona time, where I am going through the Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2 campaign, the Necrons. A few of you have been showing up, and I really appreciate that, and I'd like to meet more of you in this community we are building here, and so if you're interested, give a stop by there. But anyway, just wanted to bring that up as a general reminder. So today's topic is going to be on the horrors and mysteries of Commorragh, the dark city of the Drukhari, or Dark Eldar. I was thinking of topics that we haven't covered in the series so far, and I'm kind of surprised that I didn't really think of this one. I think that's because I sort of covered this in a Dark Eldar video a long time ago, but I didn't really focus on a lot of the mystery or horror, although it's kind of intrinsic to talking about this culture in general anyway. And this culture is basically defined by its nightmares. This culture is incredibly old, even by any modern standards of time, excluding perhaps the Necrons themselves. The Drukhari have been living in the webway since before Slaanesh was born, and possibly all the way back to when the Eldar was at its height of power, and even possibly during the War in Heaven. Although back then the culture was possibly quite a bit different, but still, a lot of the most ancient beings in this city derive from at least several thousand, if not millennia, if not millions of years in the past at most. And so with that kind of history, this place has a lot of hidden nooks and crannies and very dark and ancient secrets within its depths. And possibly the most famous of them all, and possibly what gives this dark city much of its reputation, are the Humuli. These beings are possibly some of the most ancient living creatures in the galaxy itself, and even other Drukhari tend to fear the Humuli cults that dwell within the most ancient parts of the Dark City. The main thing that makes the Dark Eldar and their city so terrifying is that they are specialists in torture, which they use to survive the predations of Slaanesh on their souls. They basically put someone's soul in proxy for their own, for she who thirsts. And it turns out that the Humuli are the specialists in pain and torture that the Drukhari society basically uses to invent new and better ways to efficiently extract the most from their victims. And so because they hold this kind of power, they are some of the oldest beings here and have found the most use for the archons of Eldar society to keep them around and let them ply their crafts, which is basically millennia's worth of torture study and dark sciences, esoteric alchemy, all these kinds of things mixed together to create new refined ways to torture their victims. Humuli see basically any of their victims as almost an artist sees canvas. They see flesh to be worked upon and torture as an art form for their sciences, essentially. Shame as a concept or regret or, thinking about a different path doesn't exist for the Humuli cults, or covens as they're called. They absolutely, gleefully, and joyfully enjoy their work, and they have for untold millennia as previously mentioned. They are incredibly ancient beings, and nigh on to immortal and very hard to kill. How exactly a Drukhari even becomes a Humuli is not really known. There isn't really a path to make them, essentially. There isn't a process. It doesn't seem to even be a recruitment method for them at all. Every single one of them seems to be incredibly unique, ancient, and different in form. They don't look like your normal Drukhari at all. They look like some kind of amalgamation of parts, customized, all to make different grotesque shapes and sizes and different, tools on them, on their arms, or what passes for arms or their face. Basically, they are so modified that they would give the Adeptus Mechanicus a run for their money for the most augmented beings in the galaxy, past their original forms, but in a much more biological, grotesque way than in the more technological, grotesque way of the Mechanicus style. It is rumored that the most ancient of these beings possibly were the beginnings of the pleasure cults way back that helped usher in the age of Slaanesh, the birth of Slaanesh, but this is unproven rumor, but certainly any members of these covens are all at least a few millennia old, if not older. Now, really, with the Humuli, you can go sky's the limit for types of torture methods that they employ, and I'm not going to list them all here because they are all horrific, and you can use your imagination on what they would do to you, and it would probably still fall short. But as one single example I like to give sometimes, imagine you are captured by the Drukhari and given over to the Humuli, and the Humuli decides to stretch you out to the thinness of a football field, your skin, and then you're still alive and screaming as they like run blades over your skin or something ridiculous like that. And then they keep you alive like that for thousands of years to milk you for your soul, essentially. Your soul energy that is leached off from the torture itself to help stave off being consumed by Slaanesh. That is essentially what they do, and the Humuli are the specialists for the society to do that in ever increasingly different, deranged, and myriad ways. And so moving from the Humuli, we're just going to go to a regular Drukhari themselves, or like basically imagine like one of their archons, which is like one of the main leaders of one of their noble houses, essentially. An archon might go to dinner, let's say, and is sitting at their table eating whatever food is brought to them by slaves, but you are the unlucky slave there that evening, specially chosen to be tortured right in front of the archon while they eat their food, essentially. And they view your myriad different screams as essentially music while they eat. Like someone listens to classical music or something. Like imagine someone especially snobbish listening to some kind of particularly snobbish music. An archon is essentially seeing a torture victim's screams as that, essentially. In some ways, it kind of has like a comedic tone to it overall because it's just so over the top, but still reasonably horrifying in its own way. Truly, the main thing with the Drukhari to understand is that they can and will keep you alive in many different ways, and that entire time will be agony, essentially, to fuel their survival. Death will truly be a mercy and release once that does come sometime in the next millennia, after you are fully milked of any last vestiges of your soul, essentially. Now, Commorragh is a city that is located in the Webway, and so it's not a normal city. This is a city that spans many different dimensions within the Webway itself, and it is a absolutely sprawling labyrinth of dark black steel type looking towers and giant hooked or barbed looking ships drifting low across the cityscape, moving past the gigantic towers and citadels of the archons. It's a giant and foreboding and absolutely labyrinthine place. If you were somehow lucky or unlucky enough to escape the clutches of being enslaved by the Drukhari, you would still have to navigate your way through endless dark streets and, just hostility around every corner. There's going to be no one around to help you. Unless you somehow were the most lucky being in the galaxy and ran across Jagate Khan stalking the depths of Commorragh or something unusual like that, but you're most likely not going to have that kind of luck. Instead, you are probably going to get recaptured and maybe captured by a different group of Drukhari, and instead of taken back to your former master, you'd be taken possibly to their gladiator arenas, where you will be bait for their witch cults, which are essentially warrior women who are incredibly good combatants who basically toy with enemy soldiers in arenas for the cheering and amusement of their crowds. Or you might die on your own terms and stumble or trip over into one of the many canals that crisscross the city in its depths. But these canals are not filled with water or something you can swim in. Instead, it's usually the runoff of millennia of hallucinogenic drugs, poisons, toxins, all kinds of things from the city that pool into these canals below the city. If you're particularly lucky, you'll just have the best trip of your life before you succumb to the absolute overwhelming cocktail of chemicals that will go through your skin, into your eyes, through your nose, mouth, all of that. But suffice it to say, you are essentially only going to be lucky in the sense that the Drukhari will no longer have you to milk you for the next thousands of years. Now, let's say you get somewhat a little bit more lucky, and you fall into one of these canals, and it's a dry canal. There's nothing in it. But chances are there is something lurking within the tunnels of these canals. Lost experiments from the Humuli, abandoned experiments, other slaves that have escaped that are less interested in having you join them, let's say. the chances of your survival are still incredibly slim in this situation. Now, let's say that you are stumbling around one of the streets in the depths, there's no one around, and you come out to an alleyway and to like an open street. But at the end of this street of dark buildings is what looks like almost like a ocean of darkness, essentially. And the edges of this darkness, this abyssal blackness, is almost like lapping towards you, like the edges of an ocean would on a beach. You have been lucky enough to stumble upon the domain of the mandrakes. Now, mandrakes are amongst one of the most nightmarish beings the Drukhari society has produced, and it's also unknown exactly how they were produced or created. If you have ever wondered where a fear of the dark has come from, well, in the 40k universe, it likely came from the mandrakes. In appearance, mandrakes are completely black-bodied with glowing runes or tattoos on their skin, and they are still bipedal, and they somewhat still have the appearance of a Drukhari, but then they also have very white hair that drapes their heads, and you can't really make out any features on their eyes, nose or mouth, anything like that on their faces. They often wield weapons that are meant to assassinate their enemies, and the reason why they cause a fear in the dark is because they have the ability to come out of shadows pretty much essentially anywhere, including in real space if they want to. Not just in the darkness of Commorragh itself or the webway itself. They can appear anywhere. And so you can imagine that cultures around the galaxy maybe have had run-ins with the mandrakes, and because of that, a fear of the dark developed just innately, possibly within the very genetic code of many species. The domain of the mandrakes is essentially a slowly spreading flood of darkness through the city of Commorragh. The Drukhari don't seem to have a way to stop it, and it slowly engulfs different districts of the city and doesn't really see any sign of stopping, and I guess the Drukhari just don't essentially care about it because the city itself is just so absolutely massive that by the time the mandrakes became a true threat to the entire city, it would be many millennia in the future, and Drukhari are not really known for caring so much about the future as just caring about getting their needs met in the moment, I would say. As mentioned previously at the beginning, for the mandrakes, what they exactly are and how they exactly came to be are unknown to anyone. What caused this dark realm to appear and spread throughout the city, no one's really sure. What they are sure of is that these beings are absolutely deadly, and their motives are often not really known. But they do like to kill, and they like to hunt, essentially. Mandrakes are often chosen by archons for raiding parties and as assassins, and as a higher payment, they are promised a share of slaves as part of any raid. And while archons and Drukhari in general are fairly capricious and plotting individuals to the extent that even Zench would give them possibly an 8 or 9 out of 10, the mandrakes are not ones to be betrayed because they tend to wear only one type of clothing, and that is the flayed skins of those beings that have betrayed them. And when these types of beings can literally appear anywhere that enough darkness is pooling, your places to hide from them are not going to be many. And most Drukhari do not like to live in incredibly brightly lit, no-shadowed places, I would say. Commorragh is not really known for its bright lights and lit-up areas, really. And so, if you saw this lapping darkness in front of you, you could enter it and it wouldn't hurt you to walk into it, but the denizens would likely find you and harvest your head and skull to be collected by them, essentially. But that is if you are a warrior of some repute. If you are simply just fodder, if you're just a normal slave of some kind, then essentially you will just be taken by them to be tortured as well. The most notorious of all the mandrakes is Drukhari. The name is quite the name. The Decapitator. And this being is described as being four-armed, hollow-eyed, and a haunter of Commorragh's depths. More so than any other mandrake, this one is known as a hunter, and especially a hunter of anything they consider a worthy predator to hunt, essentially. This mandrake made an appearance in the Dark Eldar Omnibus at one point. There was a part of one of those books that dealt with the mandrakes a bit, and dealt with this mandrake on a hunt looking for a particular leader of, I believe, the Drukhari down in Commorragh, and it talks about him essentially stalking this being and then reaching out from the darkness and taking their head in one swift stroke and then retreating back through that darkness immediately. He then tends to take the taken heads back to his lair, and he strips them of all their flesh and turns them into a gleaming skull, and he surrounds his room with them, and apparently they all are fixed to stare at a single point in space directly above where the decapitator often sits. The only other time I remember him showing up at all is actually in one of the Horse Heresy novels. Vulcan is traveling through the webway to reach Terra from his homeworld, and he actually stumbles upon this being in his lair. He actually reaches that point, and he holds his own against a Primarch, this Mandrake, and this Mandrake seems to be a real danger to Vulcan, and it ends up in a stalemate, though, but it just speaks to the power of this particular Mandrake that, we haven't really seen Primarchs fight other Mandrakes, but it can be assumed this one is possibly more powerful than the rest. Possibly more ancient, possibly even the first of the Mandrakes. All of that's pure speculation from me. Now, what exactly is this Mandrake's endgame? No one's really sure. It only mentions that it sounds like there's forbidden power building up by him collecting skulls. And he's not following Khorne, so he's not collecting the skulls for Khorne's sake. So who or for what purpose is Kharadrak hunting for? We don't know. It's one of the bigger mysteries within the depths of Commorragh, and this Mandrake is not talking. And in fact, when Vulcan ran into him, he did not say a single word. He just stripped a skull of all of its flesh right in front of Vulcan, kind of grinned at him, and then started trying to stalk and hunt him like you would hunt any of his prey. And I think I murdered his name a few times, but I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Kharadrak. So, Kharadrak the Decapitator. He's a very fascinating figure that hasn't been seen much in any content, but I think he works best as a mystery that is rarely cited. Now, let's say you avoid the Mandrakes as well. You don't go down that street with the oddly black ocean that seems to be lapping at the edges of the city, but you imagine to get a bit more lucky than anticipated, and you find some sort of vehicle that you're somehow able to operate despite it being Drukhari in origin, and you're able to essentially almost leave the city. You're able to find essentially like another webway portal that leads to a different part of the webway. But when you go through it, you're simply in a different part of this city, or in a pocket dimension that offshoots from the city, but is essentially almost what you would consider a suburb of the city. You might get very lucky and find essentially an abandoned area of the webway where there are buildings left over from the high society of the Eldar back when it was at its zenith. Many parts of the webway are simply abandoned. Or you might get unlucky and the city is abandoned because there is a rip in the side of the webway there, and there are demons infesting the city in great numbers. And if your luck continues to hold and you're able to avoid those demons and go through a different path, you might find yourself right back in the main hub of the city itself, because Commorragh is not some normal city on a normal flat plane. It is a twisting, multi-dimensional place where different tributary cities feed into it. Different dimensional portals route out to different parts of the webway and into real space. And if you're very lucky, you can get through one of these webway portals onto a planet, but then who knows what that planet even is, and if you can even breathe on it. But more likely still, you will be recaptured. And before you're recaptured, you might, for a while, be able to just drive around, but essentially you will have no sense of direction, and you will be lost for a very long time, even if you're never caught. and then you have to find something to eat. It's essentially your luck is not going to hold. Either you're going to be captured again, or even if you don't, you're going to be lost forever within the labyrinths of this nightmare dimension. It's pretty twisted to think that it might be the most merciful end for you to just be torn apart by the demons that you ran across, because going back to Commorragh is not really a good option for all the reasons I've already listed out. And, maybe as a secondary mercy, just simply being able to hide out in somewhere abandoned until you die of starvation might be a decent alternative, because there's nothing really else going for you in this case. I suppose you could come across a Harlequin, and a Harlequin would probably give you a merciful death. I don't think they would help you, really. Harlequins are not evil per se, but they're not exactly known for simply helping, like Good Samaritans, anyone that I know of. You'd have to be supremely lucky for that to be the outcome. They certainly wouldn't take you back to the Dark City, because they don't have any true love nor real hatred for what the Drukhari do. The Harlequins kind of step between societies of Aeldari, essentially, but they are also kind of horrifying in their own sense, too. But likely at your most lucky, you're simply going to stumble upon some kind of cabal of Dark Aeldari who don't want you there and may just kill you on sight, because, again, this realm, this place, this city, this dimension is one of the most hostile places in the entire galaxy that exists. You might get recaptured and taken to what's known as a food factory or weapon factory, and these are so massive in the lower spires underneath the city that they consume millions of workers and slaves amongst humans, orcs, Tau, other Drukhari, anything that basically displeases the leaders, the cabals of the Drukhari, probably end up there. There is a excerpt given by a inquisitor named Lasco Pyre, who was captured by the Drukhari and was a slave in Commorragh for a time, and somehow was able to escape captivity there. He was blinded there, and so mostly just was able to hear for most of his time in that city, and then how he escaped is not told, but essentially he talks a lot about a lot of what we've talked about, a lot of the torture, misery, pain, and all of that. And one of the interesting things is he mentions that, the slave quarters that they were in didn't really have razor wire or walls or anything like that, that the most effective barrier to leaving the slave quarters was to enter the Dark City itself and whatever was out in that nightmarish place, which they all very much knew that as bad as it was for them in the slave quarters, to leave it was even worse, worse possibility at least, for again, a lot of the reasons that we have talked about so far. And he essentially says that even though he escaped, he cannot forget the nightmares and waking visions that plague him, and the cries of anguish that haunt him daily. And he says, as a final line, no one escapes the Dark City. And believe it or not, these are far from every single thing listed for what goes on in Commorragh. As usual, I can't really go into everything without this being a super long video, and I definitely don't want to do that as of now, because everyone seems to like around 30 minutes, it seems like. So I'm going to keep it to right around here for now for this topic. So as always, consider a like and subscribe if you're liking this content. I release a few videos each week and do a live stream on Fridays. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, I will be live streaming later on today, Friday, at about 6 p.m. Arizona time on the 23rd of February. I would love to see you there. If not, I appreciate the time you've spent here on this video and any other videos within my channel. We have quite a few videos already out, many that delve into the horrors and mysteries of the setting itself. So if you are new here, I welcome you and encourage you to look around. There are quite a few more videos and topics to check out. As always, I hope you have a great day or night wherever you are. I hope to see you later on today if you have the time, and hope you have a great day or night and weekend wherever you are, and I will see you in the next video. Talk to you soon. Thank you.